Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. It is 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time. We're really excited that you are here with us this morning. We had a great start this morning with John O'Connor as our keynote opener. I think did a really great job with some great information about how to connect with our students. As we were reflecting on that session this morning, I think one of the things I really enjoyed about it is it really connected with our programs. I think he understood very clearly the kinds of programs that we all work with across the Commonwealth, and very excited about that. And what I think that you'll get from that coming into this session is that Marty Ginter also is very well versed in all of this. She knows our program. She knows special education. She is a consummate professional who I know that we're going to get a lot of information from. And I know you're going to be excited to hear from her the 7 tips for conducting successful ARC meetings. So we only have an hour. I know that we don't have a whole lot of time at the beginning for just chat, but I do want to thank you for being here with us this morning. Welcome you back. And then I will turn it over to Marty this morning. Welcome, Marty. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. Is there on my end? I'm seeing that I think my screen is up. So just in the chat or just let me know. Are you all seeing my screen?
I can see your screen, yes.
Okay. And then is there any way that we can have people turn on their cameras? Because I would love to just see some interaction with that.
Sounds good.
Okay. And then I was being told on my screen I can't turn on my camera. And so is that true?
I think when you are sharing your screen, you can't turn on your camera in Teams here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, all right then. So I'll just have to be. I can see Cameron. I can see Abigail, and that's about all on my screen. But maybe others will kind of pop up. I'm going to be using the chat for a lot of the communication. But during this session, I'm somebody that if you've ever been in a session with me, I love interaction things. I'm seeing some names in the session of people that I do know, lots of people that I don't. Couple ways to get handouts for this session. One of them is that Ronnie had put a link into the chat box. And so if you can see that, scroll back and there is a Google Drive. It's got all the different handouts, but there's a couple of them for this session. Also, if you've got a cell phone next to you or an iPad, you can just scroll over the QR code on the screen, and that should take you to to the handouts for this session. So may give you just a little bit of time to see if you can download those. And in the chat, just somebody let me know if that was something you were able to do.
And when it did, the dealerships were trying to charge $15,000 over.
So kind of waiting in the chat for someone to go, yes, got the handout. And I'll look, the handout that you should be downloading should be something that looks like this. That's got the 7 tips on it. And there's the QR code again that will take you to it. Good. Thank you, Lori, that you got the handout. And looks like Tracy, a couple others did. So good. So you were able to access that. Just like in John's session this morning, if you want to, you can just kind of jot these down. Or if you're just a good listener, a lot of these are going to be, yes, I knew that, but I just needed a reminder for that. And so let me just kind of get started with first thing I want to do is just figure out when you attend an ARC meeting, an ARC, Admissions and Release Committee meeting, when you attend that meeting, what is your primary role? I've got several examples on the screen, but would like to know when you attend, just type in, are you the chair? Are you the special ed teacher, the gen ed teacher? Are you related service? Maybe you're an outside agency. Seeing lots of special ed teachers. Seeing Tracy is a gen ed teacher. Seeing some chairs. Jeremy is the chair of a meeting. Lori's a chair. Good. So we're seeing outside agency of seeing on that also. and a backup chair. So that's a new one, but yes, you're probably you're listed as if the chair can't come, you will be there. Well, I want you to think about this morning your role. And a lot of times when we think about tips for conducting a successful meeting, we think that's all the chair's responsibility. But I want you, as the gen ed teacher, as a special ed teacher or outside agency, to think the success of this meeting is going to be collectively what we all do. And these 7 tips, some of them, yes, are going to default back to the chair, but a lot of them, anybody can jump in there. So let me just get started here. The language of special education is something that I'm finding is a barrier for us to be able to communicate at all, just in an ARC meeting. So I'm putting some of these up on the screen, and want you just in the chat box to pick one of them and tell me.
Marty, you are muted for some reason.
Thank you, because I didn't touch anything and it just muted me. So good. So thank you for keep telling me that. So on the screen, there are some acronyms, and I call that language of special education. And so if you would, somebody in the chat box then, or everybody in the chat box, pick one of those and tell me, what does it stand for? You're at an ARC meeting and that comes out. What does it stand for? And I'll keep watching until I get, there's 6 of them up there. I want to see if we can identify all 6 of them. Okay, IEP is taken, individual education plan, MMD, mild mental disability, ARC, admissions and release committee. And so I've got SAS, I've got SDI, and I got PST, specially designed instruction. So we only have 2 more of them left. I've got this SDI and PST. Any takers on those, on SAS and PST? Well, let me go ahead and just tell you what these are then. Oh, post-secondary transition. Thank you, Rhonda. Just came in. And what about SAS? This is what the student...
Because I know he gets sick of me saying, hey, you didn't get that email. He just
thank you, Madison. I got that one too. Supplementary aids and services. So it took us a while to get all of those.
Turn your camera off.
So this is my first tip to everybody. Limit or explain the use of special education acronyms or just educational jargon. And we tend to talk in special ed in what I called before special education jargon. Let me just kind of go over a sentence that that might be said. I'd like for you to attend an ARC next Tuesday about Joe. The IEP team will be discussing eligibility for SLD or OHI. We'll be reviewing his current AMG. We'll be adding SDI, SAS. We might be continuing OT and AT. And oh, by the way, he's in 8th grade, so we'll begin PST. You think, I mean, that's a total foreign language that we've got, but we tend to rattle those kind of things off in special education. And especially if you're KICSAC, well, there's an acronym all by itself that we need to be explaining to different people. And so one thing I want to encourage you to do is that make a list of the acronyms that when you're attending an ARC meeting that are typically coming up. There's probably 10 or 12 that come up all the time.
This is Anthony Picarello.
And then I would invite you to make some kind of list. And if you just go to Parent Center Hub, it's a list of hundreds of special ed acronyms. But you might want that just as a professional to have all of those. But what could be the 10 or 12 that we use consistently, and have those posted wherever you have your ARC meetings. And the one thing is to be the acronym police. no matter if you're the parent, if you're outside agency, if you're in an ARC meeting and someone uses an acronym and says something like, do we need an AT evaluation? Well, if you don't know what it means, I guarantee you the parent sitting next to you doesn't know what it means. So ask clarifying questions like, I just heard you use the acronym AT. Not sure what that stands for. Could you explain that? And then hopefully whoever said it can say, oh, that's an assistive technology evaluation. That's going to be an evaluation that's going to help us understand how the child can access different technologies like an iPad or a computer or a keyboard or an augmented communication system. So your role for tip number 1 is make sure that we're clarifying all of this different language. And by the way, if you're from out of state, we are the only state that uses the acronym ARC. No one else in the country calls it an admissions and release committee. Do you know what everybody else calls it? Something that makes a lot of sense. They call it the IEP team meeting. And so if you've got parents that are coming in or agencies that are coming in from out of state and you start talking about, oh, we're going to have an ARC meeting about that. They don't have any idea what we're talking about, nor should they. And so that's where I want you to make sure that we are the acronyms that we use frequently. Let's make a list of those and have those available so that everybody around the table can understand what they are. And so the second part of what I want to talk about here is that you've got a meeting agenda. You should have a meeting agenda. You should think about your meetings as what I do in the pre-planning so that we don't just run in and do a meeting. I mean, if we had a doctor's appointment or if we were getting ready to go to surgery, we wouldn't want a surgeon that just goes, oh, this is my 3rd broken leg today. I don't need to see x-rays. I don't need to see anything. I know how to do this. No, we want it to be very individual. So we want this to be a very individual type of meeting. So there's pre-planning that goes into it. When we begin a meeting, I'm going to talk about some things that we need to do. And during the meeting, there's decisions that we need to make. And so we need to be very aware of, are we making the decisions that we need to make? Are we just talking about things? Or are we actually making and documenting decisions? And just like we begin meetings, there needs to be this process for, yes, this meeting is over and now I'm ending the meeting. So my next couple of tips are going to be about pre-planning. What do we do to make sure that that meeting is going to be set up for success way before the meeting even starts? And so my tip number 2 is that we want to appoint the roles of timekeeper and recorder for each ARC meeting. And it may seem like this is a given, especially on the recorder, like who's going to type on the minutes, but that is something that we need to make sure that we've got that all set up. And so that when we start the meeting, we can just say the reason that Lori has got her computer out right now is because she's going to be typing up what we decide at this meeting. She's going to be doing the due process forms that we're going to be printing out to you. That helps everybody feel more comfortable and that there's only one person that has their computer out and there's a reason that they've got their computer out. We don't want a parent thinking, oh, that person's over there just doing their grades in Infant Campus, or that person's shopping on Amazon because they've got their computer out. There's things that we can just say like that at the meeting that I call say what's going on, that makes everybody feel a little bit more comfortable about what we're doing. So make sure that you're even saying Mrs. Smith is the recorder of the meeting. And then one that I find in just helps me a lot is to have a timekeeper. We just as professionals, we as humans now, we know when things are going to start. We know when things are going to finish. If I could see you all live and go, what time do you think my session is over? Everybody would go 11:45. And if I were still talking at 12, I'd be talking totally by myself because everybody in here knows it's over at 11:45. But do we do that in an ARC? We tell the parent and we tell everybody when it's going to start, but we do not set an ending time. Yet there's got to be an ending time. And sometimes I hear about these 6-hour ARC meetings, and I don't think that's necessary at all. I think the longest we need to be sitting around a table is at the very longest about 2 hours, maybe 2.5. But do you realize that our attention span, how long we can give to something, is about 90 minutes? That's why every movie that's out there is about 90 minutes, because there's research on how long we can focus on something without taking a break. And so if our meetings go beyond 90 minutes, we need to probably have a stretch break in there sometime. But just mentally, everybody needs to know when this meeting is going to end. And so if the ARC chairperson needs to say, this is an eligibility meeting, it's a very long meeting, we're probably going to be here about 2 hours. And appoint somebody to be the timekeeper. Also appoint someone that when we've been here about an hour, let us know so we can at least stand up and take a quick stretch break. I find that the persons who enjoy being the timekeeper, the gen ed teacher, because the gen ed teacher, they don't really feel like they have a lot of roles to play at this meeting. We're going to talk about that in a little bit too, but gives them a purpose. You will know your parent. Sometimes a parent will feel very comfortable being a timekeeper. Sometimes that may not be, but the members around the table. Even if you have to say, I'm going to be watching the time, make sure that you say at the beginning of the meeting when the meeting is over, and have the timekeeper tell everybody about 10 minutes before that time so that you can check in to make sure, are you on your last decision? Are you going over your all your conference summary, or are you still on the first decision? And so if you're still on the first decision and you've only got 10 minutes left, you're going to have to go to the group and say, we're going to have to either continue this meeting, is that okay with everybody, beyond our allotted time, or we're going to have to reschedule when we can give this more time. And so that prevents you from having just these meetings that go on and on and on, and no one really knows when it's going to end. So tip number 2, appoint that timekeeper and appoint the person who's the recorder. And when we're thinking about times, there's only 4 types of meetings. There's a referral meeting, and that usually is going to last about 45 to 60 minutes. If this is something that you're very familiar with, then don't jot this down. But if you're new to the field of special ed and you're going to be scheduling meetings, this is something that you need to be aware of. I need to schedule at least 45 minutes, maybe even an hour for a referral meeting. If it's an eligibility evaluation meeting, that's probably going to be our longest meeting. And it's going to be at least 90 minutes to 2 hours. So make sure you've got that big block of time. I don't want to start this meeting at 8 o'clock and every single person that is a school employee has to be in their classrooms at 9. You don't have classes covered. Well, I'm going to have to schedule that at a different time. Or I'm going to have to make sure prior to the meeting, I've got those classes covered. So that's the longest meeting. Most annual reviews are about 60 minutes, but if the student is very involved and I've got lots of related services, I've got lots of goals that we're looking at, that may take a little bit longer and be up to 90 minutes. And then that special review. It depends on what you're reviewing. If the child has brought drugs or weapons to school, I would say you're going to be there 2 hours and you may have to continue that meeting. But if it's something like, do we need to change placement from co-teaching to resource? Do we need to add special transportation? That may be a meeting that doesn't take as long. And so that may be as little as 45 minutes. But I just give you this over my years of experience on about how long. These are just estimates, But for you to think about when I'm scheduling a meeting and when I'm starting a meeting to say, we're going to be here for, make sure you can tell what the ending time is for a meeting. Telling an ending time is not in regulations at all, but it's just common courtesy to the people around the table. And tip number 3 is to make introductions based on each member's role and function. If we think about, if you're the chairperson or you're any member of it, we usually say, and let's just start the meeting by telling who we are. And it goes something like this. I'm so-and-so the gen ed teacher. I'm so-and-so the special ed teacher. I'm Dr. So-and-so, the school psychologist. I'm Dr. So-and-so, the occupational therapist. I am so-and-so, the ARC chairperson. Then we get to the parent, and a parent a lot of times goes, I'm just the mom. And right there, we by just saying our titles, we may have had a wedge in the relationship. We may have made the parent not feel valued because everybody has this big title and the parent doesn't have a title. So I want you to kind of think about, there's a different way to introduce yourself. And the way to introduce yourself is to answer a couple questions. One of them is, how do you relate to the student? And the second one is, what work are you going to do at this meeting? And to help you with that, I've designed this little just handout that was also in the that was in your resource file. But it's just to say, like, what is the function? What is the work that each member needs to do? And I just want to go through some of these and just kind of put in the chat box any comments or things, or I am totally fine with unmuting and making a comment about it. That's typically how I train. And this way is kind of, I feel not really connected to you all. So if you want to somebody unmute or put something in the chat box is fine. But if we start with, what work does each person do at the meeting? What's the function? And the ARC chairperson, you would say, I am Marty Ginter, and I'm the principal of the school, and I'm going to be doing 2 roles here today. I'm going to be chairing this meeting, which is going to lead us through the discussion. And I'm also going to make sure that whatever decisions that we make at this meeting, I'm going to ensure that they get implemented. And that's an easy way just to introduce yourself. You need to pick your words, but somehow tell, what work are you going to do at this meeting? And as the chair, you are going to lead through the agenda. You're going to make sure we hear from everybody in the group. So, and I want in the chat right now, which of the last of these 5 that are left, which ones do you think struggle with what work they're there to do at the meeting, or even why they're at the meeting? Somebody just put, or several people put in the chat, which of those required members have no idea why they're there? And maybe it's like John that I'm not. Oh, good. I am seeing some pop up in the chat right now. I agree with one that came up, student and parent. Anybody else that's got gen ed teacher and the student? Yes, I'm seeing those coming in. Right. I think that that's something that we invite people to the meeting and they have no idea why they're coming to the meeting. And so as this is a pre-planning, I can meet with especially the student. And at your KICSAC level, where we've got students that need to be advocates for themselves, a student needs to know why they're attending the meeting. And they also need to, when they introduce themselves, be able to say, I'm Joe, and I'm here to, just because we're going to be talking about my strengths and my challenges, and develop a plan for myself. Or I'm here because I want everybody to understand me a little bit better. I'm here because I have 16 and I've got a post-secondary goal of what I'm going to be doing after I graduate from high school. And I just want to share that goal with everybody. That's not going to roll off the student just the first time, but with some practice, This is an excellent time for the student to practice advocacy. This is a safe environment for him to practice. We want it to get to the time where the student can say, hello, I'm Joe, and I've got a post-secondary goal that I want to work in a factory after I graduate from high school. And I do struggle with staying on task, or I do struggle with some reading comprehension. Being able to say that in this environment is going to be something that will be a great practice for that student when he gets out into the not so safe environment of the school, but when he's out working in the general public then. And I like what Tracy says. I find most high school kids don't even know they have an IEP. And so all of those are conversations that, in my opinion, that's the job of the case manager every year, to meet with those students and go over their IEP in a language that they can understand, and let them know this is what we're working on this year and this is why we're working on it. So if I move on here, the special education teacher is going to be the person who introduces themselves as, and I have data to share. I've got how Joe is doing on last year's goal, and I've got proposed goals for this year coming up. And I'm going to take part in this discussion to help us make the best decisions we can for Joe. That's the role of the special education teacher. The general education teacher, I think sometimes they think they're there to sign their name and that's it. But the gen ed teacher has a very important function, very important job. Their job is to provide information about gen ed for that age group of students. Those of us in special ed, sometimes we kind of have a skewed view of what normal is, what typical is. If we've got a student that can write 5 sentences, we are thrilled and we think that's age appropriate. Then we get with the gen ed teacher who says, no, most of my students in the 6th grade are writing multiple paragraphs about a topic, not just 5 sentences. And so we need that gen ed teacher to be able to clarify the gen ed curriculum. When I have had gen ed teachers that have said to me, well, you've asked me to come to this meeting on Tuesday. I don't even know this child. Why would I be coming to the meeting? And what I can say back to them is, Joe is 16 and he's going to be a sophomore in high school. You have worked with sophomores your entire career as the language arts teacher. You know that language arts curriculum for 16-year-olds, forwards and backwards. And so at this meeting, we need your input to tell us, how is Joe as a 16-year-old socially, behaviorally, and academically going to relate to the 10th grade curriculum? And then I've never had a gen ed teacher say back to me, well, sorry, I don't really know my 10th grade curriculum. Of course they do, because they're the experts in that. And so that is something that we give them the words prior to the meeting to be able to know why they're at the meeting. And just as a little kind of story here, I was doing this training and had a principal afterwards say, he really resonated with that part about gen ed doesn't know their reason to be there. And so at the beginning of the school year, at the first faculty meeting, he did a quick little exit slip and said, tell me why you come to an ARC meeting. And he put it out to them. It's okay to say, I don't know. And the answers that came back, a majority of those were, I don't know, or because you tell me to come. Somebody tells me I have to be there. And so he took that as a teachable moment. And in the next couple of faculty meetings, with the help of his special education teachers, did some tutorials on what the ARC is about and why we need the gen ed teacher. And he used this part of it to say, this is why I need you there. You're the expert in gen ed curriculum, and taught them the words to say when they introduce themselves to say, hello, I'm Mrs. Smith. I have Joe in the 5th grade, and I'm here to share 5th grade curriculum, what 5th graders do socially also, so that we can compare where Joe is to where 5th graders are, so we can make a better plan for Joe. That rolled off the teachers' tongues after that, made such a difference. And so maybe that's something that we can also, that you might pick up for this. I saw Pam in the chat box that if there was at the very beginning of this chat, and maybe we can put it back in, that is the link to where you can go to get this. Also, a QR code is going to be coming up in a couple slides. If you just put your phone over it, that will also take you to the handouts. Or just email me when this is over and I can send it to you. But the related service personnel, same way. The related servant personnel doesn't need to say, I'm the SLP, I work with Joe on Tuesdays, but he needs to say, I work with him on speech and language, and I'll be sharing the data that I have on Joe and helping us make decisions. Or I have an evaluation to share, and then I'll share that when we do strengths and challenges. Parent needs to know that they're there because they're the voice of the student. If a parent says something like, just the mom, I'm here at the meeting, I got a notice to come, I'm Joe's mom. Then as a member, the gen ed teacher can say this just as easily as the chair can say, and we are thrilled that you're here because you really are the voice of your student. You know your student better than anyone else. And we want you to be able to share what you know about the student, and we can compare maybe what's going on at home with what we're seeing at school. And we need you here to help us develop this plan. I think a parent's going to feel a lot more comfortable and know, yes, there's a purpose for them to be there. And then we've already talked a little bit about the student, but the student needs to be there to tell about his strengths and challenges. I encourage you at the high school level to have your students, when you start talking about what are the strengths, let the student have a list of 3 or 4 strengths that he has generated that he can share so that we can turn it over and say, Joe, what are the strengths that you're seeing for yourself? And if Joe says, I love to play video games, that's a strength. Let's record that and make sure that Joe feels valued and heard. And then we can go ahead and talk about what are some other strengths. And we get this buy-in because we've got the strengths listed first. So that was tip number 3, is just to make sure that when we're starting ARC meetings, everybody has a role and everybody knows their function. What's the work they're there to do? And so tip number 4 is somebody at the beginning of the meeting, hopefully it's the chair, explains that we're going to use consensus for decision making. Those of us in special ed, we know that. We know that we are listening to everybody. We're taking little straw polls throughout the meeting to see, are we on board with 20 minutes a day for speech language services? Is co-teaching everybody on board for co-teaching for reading and math? We kind of behind the scenes are doing that, but we're not saying that out loud and making sure that everybody understands that. This has come to light for me within the past couple years because people have been talking about, they think they vote at ARC meetings, and that they thought if they just had enough people, the parents thought if they just brought enough members in, then they could vote and overrule what the school said. And it just to me was like, oh my goodness, we've not really explicitly said at the beginning of the meeting, we make decisions based on consensus. And consensus means that we can all live with the decision. It may not have been our first choice, but we're now seeing that based on the data, that's the best choice for the student. And we're all going to try to support that. That's what consensus is, a decision that we're all saying we can live with. And I think just by saying that at the beginning of a meeting makes everybody understand how we're going to make decisions at this meeting. And there's absolutely, the loudest person doesn't get it. The side that's got the most votes doesn't get it. But we also have to know, if you do not reach consensus, then the ARC chairperson has to say, it doesn't look like we're getting to consensus. So I do have to put what is the school's position. And since we didn't get to consensus, the school's position is that Joe will will be starting an alternative school in 2 weeks. And then you have to say to the parent, if you're not in agreement with that, here's the route you can take. We can let this just play out and he goes to alternative school. You can file with a due process hearing. You can file with a resolution meeting, or we can file with a KDE for a complaint. And so that's something that we need to make sure that we're doing also. If we work towards consensus, but if we don't come to consensus, we're stating the school's position and letting the parent know what's their choices after that. So that was tip number 4. And tip number 5 is to follow the meeting agenda that's based on the purpose of the meeting. And I think most of us are familiar with this next form. It's a due process form that we send to a parent every time we have a meeting. And this little first part of the form is really setting up the agenda for what we're going to be talking about at that meeting. And I want to bring to your attention, every single meeting after that initial referral eligibility meeting, you're going to check this box because it's going to be to develop, review, and revise the IEP. Once a student has an IEP, every single meeting after that starts with, so how's it working? How are the goals and objectives that we set out in the last meeting? What's the data on those? And sometimes we forget that when it's a special review. And sometimes we forget that when a child, like in a Kicksack program or something, is moving from placement to placement. No matter what the meeting was called for, we started with reviewing. So what's the progress on the goals that we have set at the last meeting? And another part of that agenda that we're always going to have, if the student is in 8th grade or before the 14th birthday, we're always going to have post-secondary transition as part of the agenda. And so my advice for you is to do a written agenda that is going to be used for each meeting. That's not required in any kind of regulations, but just to take what you've checked on the notice and develop something as simple as this. And I've just got a written out agenda that says the first thing I'm going to do at this meeting is go over present level, get those strengths and challenges for that student. And then I'm going to establish new goals for that student, or say the goals that we've got are still working. Then I'm going to do what extra services might I need to meet those goals. And then once I've got the present level and the goals and the services, then I can move into placement. Just having this written out, to me, helps everybody understand where are we going next. And if I get someone that I'm right up here and I'm talking about strengths and challenges, and that parent says, I just want to know who's going to teach Joe next year. Is he still going to be in co-teaching for math? I can then just come down here to the bottom and say, that's a placement decision. We're going to be talking about that when we get to this part. This agenda is based on federal law. We have to go through it in this way. And so after we get the goals and objectives written, we've got the related services all laid out, then we can talk about who's going to teach that. And that can help with the gen ed teacher, I find, loves this also, because the gen ed teacher is able to see that we don't make placement decisions until after we've written the goals. And it's a learning process for them. And so I would encourage you, make up your own little form, or maybe use something like this where you've got a written agenda, and your agenda is going to look the same for every single meeting. Notice there's things I didn't put in here. Post-secondary transition. Well, if the child is over 14, I've got to plug post-secondary transition in here someplace. Maybe it fits to do it last and put it at the very end, but probably not, I think post-secondary transition goes up here with strengths and challenges. But again, that's your art form of how you're going to run the meeting. Wherever you want to add those extra things, maybe I do need to go over with the student a community work-based instruction. Where might that fit in? And so I'll just add it where I think it needs to fit in. So everybody knows that's where we're going to talk about that. So that was my tip number 4, was to make sure that, or tip number 5, to make an agenda, a written agenda that's posted so everybody can see it. It can just be on an 8x10 piece of paper that's on the table. Or I can have a chart and have it so that everybody in the room can see it and actually check these off as I go. If you're doing a virtual meeting, it can be something that I've got up on a screen that I can, as I'm sharing my screens, I can check off to let everybody know where we are in that meeting. It just helps to keep us on track. It's also a way when someone asks a question that we're not ready for yet, I can visually show them when we're going to talk about that. And so tip number 6 is just ensure that there's input from all members so that they feel valued and heard. Anybody on the team can do this. And we do this by looking at people's body language and by asking clarifying questions to say, Mrs. Smith, doesn't seem like you're really on board with that, with us doing co-teaching and resource. Can you kind of tell me what your concerns might be? So don't just let silence be something that you feel like. I think in ARC meetings, we have this practice that I hope goes away. Silence means agreement. And I've seen it way too many times where the school district just comes in and says, here's the strengths and weaknesses, here's the goals, here's what we think needs to happen as far as placement. Is this okay? And then everybody just signs off on it, everybody leaves. And then you get the phone call the next day from the parent that says, I don't really want him to be in co-teaching. I want him to think he does better if he's in the resource room. Or the gen ed teacher comes in and says, do you realize how disruptive he is in my co-teaching class? I can't have him in the co-teaching class. So those are the discussions that need to happen in the meeting. And so make sure that we're hearing from everybody. If somebody says a strength, if somebody says that Joe is definitely on task in my resource setting when we do our small groups, clarify that. Gen ed teacher, do you see that Joe is on task in your classroom? If not, then that's a relative strength. That's a strength in a small group setting, but it might be a challenge in a large group. So we need to make sure that when someone says something, we are making sure that everybody is feeling valued and heard. We're getting input from everybody. Parents got a lot of information about the child. Let's make sure we're pulling that out. And another tip is let's make sure that the school psychologist or whomever is not just reading scores. Scores are for eligibility. We need to say, yes, the scores are showing eligibility and fill out those eligibility forms. But we need to make sure that when we're saying things like he scored an 83 on decoding on the Woodcock-Johnson, we need to say that is within the average, below average range compared to other peers. It doesn't seem like that reading decoding is an area that is giving Joe the most difficulty. But on social skills, he has a standard score of 62. The average would be 100. And so this social skills is an area that we need to be working on. That kind of lingo is going to be better than just listing these standard scores for us to make sure that everybody is understanding what we're talking about. And right now, I don't feel like that. I feel like I'm a talking head over here. So if there's any comments or anything, I'm looking at the chat box and I'm seeing that Tim did put in there that if the QR code was easier to access some things with. So I just want to open up to chat box and put in so far what we've talked about. What is something that comment that or that you want to that has resonated with you, or that just something that you want to, I need to see some feedback. Jeremy, thank you. Maybe if there's a couple more that you can just say that what is something so far, or a question that you might have. I'm seeing a whole lot of little circles that have initials on them, but I would love to be able to get a comment from somebody. Okay, thank you. I'm seeing about being the advocate is something, and the roll sheet. Okay, well, good. So at least I'm getting some comments there. Somebody wanting to make a comment?
Marty, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hey, this is Julie. I can get my chat box to open for some reason. I think I love all the points that you're making. The one thing that I've kind of found in our ARCs is that I always like to help folks focus on the parent concerns initially, because if we don't kind of give them that, they may not really share that.
Okay, to focus on the parent, and if I can piggyback on that, a tip that I want to make sure that we are doing, let's make sure that we're starting with parent strengths first. And let's make sure that we start every meeting. Of course, there's concerns. We wouldn't be at a special education meeting if there weren't some kind of concerns. But that child also has strengths. We know when we write the IEP that our guidance document says list strengths. Well, we've already got them written on our draft IEP. Let's make sure that the parent can list a strength and that the school can list a strength. And then some of those strengths will help us when we're trying to figure out what's the best placement, what's the best program. But thank you, Julie, for bringing that to our attention then, about making sure that we hear from the parent and get their concerns out. And Tracy, yes, that parents are totally lost with the acronyms, and we do need to do a better job of explaining those. So let's look at this final tip. And it's how we end that meeting. And I want you to end every meeting by reviewing your accomplishments and thanking the members for their time and participation. How you end a meeting is going to carry over to how you're going to start the next meeting. And special education is an annual meeting. For some students, there's 3 or 4 meetings a year. And we want to make sure that the meeting doesn't end by saying, well, I guess we've done everything, time's up, see you all later. Or on your way out, make sure that you're signing that you were here. We don't want to end meetings with things like that. I have been in meetings literally where a bell has rung at the high school level and 3 people said, well, I got to get back to my class, that's it. And they've gotten up and left. We do not want meetings to end like that. We want to make sure that the ARC chairperson, and if the ARC chairperson doesn't do this, you can do it as a member. You can just say things like, let's make sure that before we all leave, let's review what were the major decisions that we made and just kind of clarify. That's where you go over. We've decided Joe will have 45 minutes of speech twice a week. We've decided that Joe will receive behavioral instruction through a PASS program. We have decided that he'll get 20 minutes a day of resource for social skills instruction, and just go through each one of those and make sure that, yes, you're getting head nods or you're getting clarifications. I have been at that part of the meeting and someone has said, oh, I thought we said co-teaching for math. And we'll go, well, then you open the discussion up for a little bit and you can go back and make sure that you have clarified exactly what the decisions that you've made. And then the thanking the members, I find that just 1 or 2 words at the very end of it, I can just say, I just really appreciate how everyone was focused on Joe at this meeting. I do think because of your focusing, we've got a great plan for Joe for the next school year. Something as simple as that, or I can go around the table and do quick reminders to everybody and say, I just want to thank you, Gen Ed teacher, for really filling us in on that 7th grade curriculum. That was so helpful. Thank you, special education teacher, for bringing in a draft and for taking the minutes. I know that's very difficult to do that. I want to thank you, Joe, as the student here. You really shared your input, and that was very helpful to us. Thank you, Mrs. Smith, as Joe's mother. The input, the insight that you provided on home was really helpful to us. That may sound hokey, but that's something that could take as little as 5 minutes, and everybody will leave with a positive attitude, and that you will not have those parking lot meetings where I have done this before, where we've left a meeting, I go out to get in my car, and the ARC is reconvened around the parent's car. And that's when they're discussing all the things that they didn't talk about in the meeting. You don't want that to ever happen. You want to make sure that there's closure at this meeting and that you're ending the meeting. If you've had to do an action plan at some meetings, there's things that have come up that didn't really pertain to the IEP that we put either in an action plan to address later, or maybe we did a parking lot and we said, we can address that after the meeting. Well, this is the time that you're going to say, I see up on the parking lot, Mrs. Smith wanted to talk with the parent about the permission slip that needs to come in for the field trip, or the free and reduced lunch form needs to be filled out. Well, now that we're all finished with the IEP, that's a good time for we'll all leave, and that's a good time for them to talk about that. It's just a nice way to have closure for all of this. And so those are my 7 tips. And what I would like for you to do is to, in the chat box, you can just put the numbers down. I want you to do a little self-assessment. Which one of these, 1 through 7, do you feel like, yeah, I already do that, and I'm pretty good at that? This was just a reminder. So in the chat box, I'm just looking for those numbers, 1 through 7. What are you self-identifying that, yeah, this was just a quick refresher? Okay, thank you. I'm seeing those 3 and 6 come in. How about some other ones? Thank you. Thanks, Tim and Tracy and Lori and Jeremy. Thank you for putting those in there. And I see some people putting multiple ones that you're good at. That's totally all right. Now, I want you to do some action planning for me. That was celebrating. Now we're going to do some action planning. I want you to think about which one of those are something that's not currently in your practice that you want to now, in this next school year coming up, focus on that. And we're going to make it even, you've thought about it, but I'm going to move it to an accountability level. I want you to put it in the chat. That's now you're saying to everybody out there that what number are you going to make sure that this school year coming up that you definitely want to start working on. And now I'm seeing some that come in, and I see a lot that are coming in to say you want to start making those introductions in a different way. I am thrilled that that's something you want to put into your practice. And I'm seeing a lot about the timekeeper. So I'm going to turn this back over to Richard and just say that I hope that you got some tips. And I didn't realize that John was going to have 6 tips, and now I've got 7 tips. Maybe your next presentation will have 8 tips that you're going to do for something. Maybe we were into the tips for this conference. But thank you for your participation. I know that's really hard to do on Teams, but thank you so much. And I enjoyed doing this presentation for you all today.
Great. Thanks so much, Marty. I appreciate your time this morning. thank you to everybody who participated with us. I think we got a lot of really great, valuable information from that. I know I did. I'm sure many of you did as well. I love the strategy of introducing by roles so that everybody there knows why they're participating and what they're doing to support the student and how they're doing that. I think that's a really great tip for us moving forward. So I really appreciate that. And thank you for taking the time with us this morning, Marty, and giving us those 7 great tips. We'll see if the next one has 8.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
We
you
are
so
going to
much.
take, oh, go ahead.
I just said thank you, and
you're
I
welcome.
appreciate your feedback.
We are going to take a lunch break until 12:15. So you have a little bit of downtime, and then at 12:15 on your agenda, you'll see you have our next 3 breakout sessions, and you'll join those in the same way that you joined this one. You'll just click on the link in the handout that'll take you into your session. Just a reminder, we will have an evaluation at the end of this, and so once you complete that evaluation, it'll automatically generate your ELA credit and other credits back to you. So that link will be coming up soon. And we also, those of you who are interested in special education topics in particular, we have 2 additional presentations around special education tomorrow afternoon. One of those is looking at the IDEA audits that the Department of Education has conducted on KECSAC programs across the state and looking at trends. So if you're interested in what's being, what the department is looking at in other programs, they'll be giving you an overview of that, which I think is really, really critical for us as we move into a new year. And we continually want to make sure we're meeting the needs of our students. So I think that'll be very interesting for us, and also answer a lot of the questions that are very specific to our KECSAC programs. Things like, what happens when you come in on Monday morning and you have a new student in your classroom that was placed there by a judge or by a social worker, and there was no transition meeting prior to placement? What do you do then? So those kinds of questions will be answered during that session. So I know you'll be interested in hearing that. And the other is a more general special education and KECSAC program that you'll hear as well. So we hope that you'll join those tomorrow. And at this point, we're going to thank you again for being here and hope that you enjoy your lunch break. We will come back at 12:15 and we hope to see you then. Thanks, everybody.